The patent attorney across the mahogany table slid the documents toward my sister with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Chen, we've found some irregularities in your patent filing. I watched Melissa's face drain of color as she picked up the papers with trembling fingers. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Her lawyer leaned over to read them, and I saw his expression shift from confident to concerned in the span of 3 seconds. What irregularities? Melissa's voice cracked. She shot me a look across the table, half confusion, half accusatory, as if I could possibly be responsible for whatever bomb was about to drop. If only she knew. It appears, the attorney continued, his tone professionally neutral, that your revolutionary AI-powered sustainable fashion platform, the one you've spent the last 18 months building, the one you've raised $3 million for, was actually invented and documented by someone else. 2 years before you filed your patent application. Melissa's face went from white to red. That's impossible. I created NextThread. Every line of code, every algorithm, every business model component. Actually, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the room, you didn't. Everyone turned to look at me. I met my sister's eyes and saw the exact moment comprehension dawned. The exact moment she remembered. The night before our mother's 50th birthday party. The night she'd climbed through my bedroom window at 2 a.m., drunk and crying about her failing startup. The night I'd been stupid enough to comfort her, to show her my notebooks, to explain the revolutionary system I'd been developing in secret for years. The night she'd photographed everything while I slept. Emily? Melissa whispered. What did you do? I smiled. It was the same smile I'd seen on her face at my funeral, barely concealed beneath a mask of grief. The same smile she'd worn while giving my eulogy, describing her tragic, troubled sister who had never quite found her way. I died, I said simply. And then I came back. And this time I was ready for you. Let me take you back 26 months. To the night I died the first time. I was 27 years old, living in a studio apartment in a building where the heat barely worked and the neighbors sold drugs in the stairwell. I'd been coding for 72 hours straight, surviving on instant ramen and coffee that tasted like burned rubber, trying to debug the last critical flaw in my AI algorithm before the investor meeting I'd somehow secured for the following week. This meeting was everything, my entire future, 5 years of work, compiled into one presentation. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. Can I crash at your place? Had a fight with Jason. I should have said no. God, I should have said no. But Melissa was my sister, my older sister by 3 years, and despite everything, despite the lifetime of small cruelties and casual betrayals, I still loved her. Still wanted her approval. Still hoped that maybe one day she'd look at me with something other than thinly veiled contempt. So I said yes. She arrived at midnight, mascara smeared, designer dress wrinkled, reeking of expensive wine. She cried on my shoulder about Jason's infidelity, about how hard her life was managing a social media marketing agency, about how nobody appreciated her genius. I made her tea. I let her take my bed while I worked. And when she asked what I was working on, because of course she asked, Melissa always needed to know everything. I was so tired, so desperate for connection that I told her. I explained my concept. An AI system that could predict fashion trends by analyzing social patterns, environmental data, and manufacturing capabilities to create a truly sustainable, waste-free fashion supply chain. I showed her my business plan, my financial projections, my partnerships with textile manufacturers. I even pulled up my patent application draft, which I plan to file right after the investor meeting. She asked smart questions, seemed genuinely interested, told me she was proud of me. It was the first time she'd said that in my entire life. I didn't notice her taking photos with her phone while I went to the bathroom. Didn't notice her scrolling through my laptop while I dozed off at my desk around 4 a.m. Didn't notice her uploading files to her cloud storage before she left in the morning with a kiss on my cheek and a promise to help me practice my pitch. 3 days later, I had my investor meeting. I arrived to find the room already full, but not with my scheduled investors, with Melissa, with her team, with the same investors I was supposed to be pitching to, except they were all smiling and shaking her hand and congratulating her on her innovative vision. Emily, Melissa's face was a mask of concern when she saw me. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. There must have been a scheduling mix-up. These investors actually reached out to me last week about a project I've been developing. That's my project. My voice came out strangled. That's my AI platform, my fashion algorithm, my— Emily, please. Melissa's voice dripped with practiced patience, the tone she used when I was being difficult. I know you've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you saw some of my early sketches when you crashed at my place last month. Sometimes when you're exhausted, memories can get confused. I never crashed at your place. You crashed at mine 3 nights ago. You photographed my work? Sweetheart. One of the investors, a silver-haired woman in a Chanel suit, gave me a pitying look. Melissa showed us her prototypes and business plan over 2 weeks ago. She's been developing this for nearly a year. Perhaps you should go home and rest. I tried to argue, tried to explain, but Melissa had the documentation, my documentation with dates, altered, and her name on everything. She had a team, an office, a website that had been backdated to show months of development history. I had nothing but a studio apartment and a laptop and my word against hers. The investors chose to believe the successful entrepreneur with a track record, not the unknown struggling coder living in poverty. I stumbled out of that building into downtown traffic without looking. The last thing I saw before the truck hit me was Melissa's face in the window above, watching. Not horrified, not guilty, satisfied. I woke up on my 25th birthday, not in a hospital, not in heaven or hell, in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, with the same NSYNC poster on the wall, the same crack in the ceiling I used to trace with my eyes when I couldn't sleep. My phone showed a date from 2 years and 3 months earlier. At first, I thought I'd gone insane. Then I thought I was dreaming. Then I thought I'd died, and this was some kind of punishment, being forced to relive the worst years of my life, the years where Melissa's cruelty had escalated from childhood meanness to calculated destruction. It took me 3 days to accept the truth. I had somehow been given a second chance, and I was going to use it. The first thing I did was check my old cloud storage. My original work was still there, carefully documented with timestamps. I downloaded everything, backed it up in 5 different locations, and then I began to think. In my previous life, I'd made critical mistakes. I'd trusted Melissa. I'd showed her my work before protecting it. I'd been naive enough to believe that blood meant loyalty. This time, I would be smarter. This time, I would let her steal from me. But first, I needed to understand the battlefield. My family had always been complicated. My parents, Michael and Laura Chen, were first-generation immigrants who'd built a successful medical supply business through brutal hours and savage determination. They'd raised Melissa and me with high expectations and little warmth. But their affection, limited as it was, had never been equally distributed. Melissa was the golden child, beautiful, charming, socially adept. She'd gotten the ballet lessons, the private tutors, the European vacations. I'd gotten the hand-me-downs and the lectures about being more like my sister. When Melissa struggled in school, it was because the system wasn't built for creative minds like hers. When I struggled, it was because I wasn't trying hard enough. When Melissa got caught shoplifting at 16, my parents paid to make it go away and blamed her friends. When I accidentally broke my mother's favorite vase at 14, I was grounded for 3 months and forced to repay its value from my birthday money. The differential treatment bred exactly what you'd expect. Melissa learned that rules didn't apply to her, that she could take whatever she wanted, that consequences were for other people, and I learned to stay small, stay quiet, and never expect fairness. But I'd also learned to survive, to be self-sufficient, to rely on myself, which is why at 18 I'd turned down my parents' offer to pay for college, an offer that came with strings about studying business so I could join the family company, and instead gotten a full scholarship to study computer science. Why I'd taught myself to code, to design, to build things from nothing. Melissa had studied marketing at an expensive private school on my parents' dime, and then used family money to start her first agency, which failed, as did her second and her third. But every failure was someone else's fault, and my parents kept writing checks. By the time of my 25th birthday, this birthday, my second time living it, Melissa was on startup number 4, bleeding money and desperate for a big break. which is why, in my original timeline, she'd been so ready to steal my idea when the opportunity presented itself. Now, I just had to recreate that opportunity. On my terms. I spent 6 months preparing. First, I refined my AI fashion platform, making it even more sophisticated than my previous version. I documented everything meticulously, every line of code, every algorithm, every business model component. I filed provisional patents for every element, carefully backdating my research notes and keeping detailed logs of my development process. Then I built the trap. I created 2 versions of the business plan. The first, the real one, was complete, polished, revolutionary. It represented 5 years of work compressed into 6 months of focused development. I locked this version away where Melissa could never find it. The second version was almost as good, but with critical flaws built into the foundation. The AI algorithm looked sophisticated but had a fatal flaw in its learning model that would cause it to fail under scale. The supply chain partnerships I listed were real, but I deliberately avoided signing exclusive contracts, knowing Melissa would never think to check. The financial projections were impressive but relied on market assumptions that I knew would fail. Most importantly, I developed the real platform with a unique authentication system that would prove I was the original creator. Every piece of code, every algorithm had my fingerprints embedded in ways that couldn't be stripped out without breaking the entire system. Then I waited for Melissa to make contact. It happened exactly as it had before, down to the same date. She texted asking to crash at my place. Showed up drunk, cried about Jason. This time, I knew she'd already been in contact with my investors, had already been rejected for funding for her failing marketing agency, was desperately looking for her next big thing. This time, when she asked what I was working on, I hesitated just long enough to seem reluctant. Let her coax it out of me. Made sure she felt like she was getting access to a secret. I showed her the fake business plan, the flawed algorithm, the incomplete patent application, and then, just as before, I let her photograph everything while I pretended to sleep. Watching Melissa steal my work the second time was surreal. I'd pulled up a security camera app on my phone, something I'd installed days earlier, and watched in real time as she carefully photographed each page of my notebooks, uploaded files from my laptop, and even took pictures of my sketches on the wall. Her face was completely focused, calculating. There was no guilt, no hesitation. When she kissed my cheek goodbye in the morning, I kissed her back and wished her a good day. Then I immediately filed my real patent applications, the ones she knew nothing about, for every component of my actual AI fashion platform. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched Melissa work with fascinating speed. She created a company, NextThread, using shell corporations to hide the initial funding source, built a website backdated to show months of development, hired a team of developers to code what she thought was my algorithm, based on the flawed specifications she'd stolen. She even had the audacity to call me for advice on a project she was working on, asking leading questions to fill in the gaps in her stolen knowledge. I helped her, enthusiastically, making sure every piece of guidance I gave her sent her further down the wrong path. When she stole my investor meeting, exactly as before, I played my part perfectly, showed up shocked, acted devastated, let her gaslight me in front of everyone. The investors chose her again. This time, I left the building with a smile on my face. NextThread launched to tremendous fanfare. The tech press loved Melissa's story, a young female entrepreneur revolutionizing sustainable fashion with artificial intelligence. She gave interviews about her vision, her passion for the environment, her years of development. She raised $3 million in seed funding, hired 50 employees, signed deals with major retailers. I watched it all from my studio apartment, working 12-hour days on my real platform, building partnerships, refining my technology. And I waited for the cracks to show. It took 8 months. The first problems were small. The AI started making weird recommendations, suggesting winter coats in summer, predicting trends that never materialized. Melissa's team scrambled to fix it, but they couldn't, because the flaw was fundamental to the stolen algorithm's architecture. Then the supply chain issues hit. The manufacturers I'd listed in the fake plan, the ones Melissa had contacted for partnerships, started backing out when they realized she didn't have exclusive contracts and her technology didn't work as advertised. Customers complained. Retailers threatened to pull out. Investors started asking uncomfortable questions. Melissa went on a PR offensive, blaming the problems on growing pains and market volatility. She hired expensive consultants who couldn't fix what was fundamentally broken. And through it all, she never once suspected that her brilliant sister, the one she'd crushed so easily, had orchestrated her entire downfall. I waited until she was thoroughly committed, until she'd spent most of the $3 million, until her reputation was built entirely on NextThread's success. Then I filed my patent infringement lawsuit. The lawsuit was beautiful in its simplicity. My attorney, a patent litigation specialist I'd hired on contingency, laid out the case with mathematical precision. I had filed comprehensive provisional patents for every element of my AI fashion platform 2 years before Melissa filed her application. I had time-stamped documentation of every stage of development. I had the source code with my unique authentication system embedded throughout. And most damningly, I had the security camera footage of Melissa photographing my work. Melissa's initial response was to deny everything. She claimed she'd developed NextThread independently, that any similarities were coincidental, that I was a troubled person making false accusations. Her lawyers tried to argue that my earlier patent filings were somehow fraudulent, backdated, fabricated. Then we produced the metadata, the witness testimonies, the forensic analysis of her code showing where she'd tried and failed to strip out my authentication markers. The case was airtight, but what made it truly devastating was the discovery process. See, I'd known that Melissa hadn't stopped with stealing my work. She'd built her entire life on taking shortcuts, on using other people's efforts and claiming them as her own. So I'd hired a private investigator to dig into NextThread's development. What we found was damning. The team she'd hired to code the platform? She'd plagiarized their work too, taking open source code without attribution, stealing designs from freelancers and never paying them, even lifting entire marketing campaigns from small companies who couldn't afford to sue her. NextThread wasn't just built on my stolen intellectual property, it was built on a foundation of theft from dozens of people. During discovery, all of this came out. The press that had loved Melissa's entrepreneurial story turned on her with savage glee. Headlines screamed about the fake founder and the con artist CEO. Journalists dug into her past and found the trail of failed startups, unpaid invoices, and burned bridges. Her investors demanded their money back. Her employees quit en masse. Her partners sued for breach of contract. And through it all, Melissa kept insisting she was the victim, that I was jealous, that this was a conspiracy. Until we got to the patent hearing. "You knew," Melissa whispered now, staring at me across the conference table. "This whole time. You knew I would steal it. You let me." "Yes," I said simply. "But why? Why not just protect your work? Why let me take it?" I leaned forward, my hands folded on the table. "Because if I'd just filed patents and kept you away from my work, you would have found something else to steal, someone else to hurt. You would have kept getting away with it the way you always have, because people like you always do." I watched her face crumble, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, just a cold, clear sense of completion. "I needed you to commit fully," I continued, "to build your entire identity and future around the theft, to get so deep that when it all collapsed, there would be no way out, no way for you to talk yourself free or charm your way to another chance." "You're insane," Melissa said, but her voice was shaking. "You ruined my life over some code. You tried to ruin mine first." My voice was quiet but hard. "You stole my work. You gaslit me in front of investors. You built your success on my ideas and my labor. And in my first life, you succeeded. I died with nothing while you profited from my creation." Melissa's lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should discuss settlement terms." "No settlement," my attorney cut in smoothly. "My client wants a full trial, and she wants every piece of evidence entered into public record." I saw Melissa's face go pale. A public trial would mean everything. The theft, the security footage, the pattern of plagiarism would become permanent record, searchable, undeniable. "Emily, please." Melissa's voice cracked. For the first time since childhood, I saw real fear in her eyes. "I'm your sister. We can work this out. I'll give you whatever you want." "I don't want your apology," I said. I don't want your money. I want the truth in the public record. I want everyone to know what you are, and I want to make sure you can never do this to anyone else." I stood up, gathering my papers. "See you in court, Melissa." The trial took 3 months to prepare and 2 weeks to execute. In that time, Melissa's life continued its spectacular collapse. NextThread filed for bankruptcy. The remaining employees sued for unpaid wages. 2 of Melissa's early investors filed criminal charges for fraud. The board of her marketing agency, the one she'd been running before NextThread, voted her out when they discovered she'd been embezzling funds to finance her startup. But the worst part for Melissa wasn't the financial or legal troubles. It was our parents. Michael and Laura Chen had built their lives on respectability, on the image of a successful immigrant family with 2 accomplished daughters. They'd overlooked Melissa's flaws for years because she'd always managed to maintain the veneer of success. But there's no overlooking a federal fraud investigation and front-page headlines about stolen intellectual property. My parents showed up at my apartment 3 weeks before the trial. "Emily," my mother said, sitting stiffly on my cheap couch, "we need you to drop this lawsuit." I looked at them, these people who had raised me but never really seen me, and felt a wave of exhausted sadness. "No," I said simply. "She's your sister," my father insisted. "Family protects family." "She's never protected me." I met his eyes. "Not once. And neither have you." My mother's face tightened. "That's not fair. You've always chosen her, given her every advantage, covered for her, financed her failures. And when she stole my life's work and destroyed my future, where were you?" Silence. In my first life, I stopped myself. They wouldn't understand. "You've never believed me, never chosen me, never protected me. So, no, I won't drop the lawsuit to save the daughter you actually love." First life? My mother's voice was sharp. "Emily, what are you talking about?" I could have told them, could have tried to explain the impossible, that I'd died and come back, that I'd lived through Melissa's betrayal once already. But what would be the point? "Nothing," I said. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that Melissa stole from me, and I'm not going to let it go, not this time." My father stood, his face hard. "If you do this, if you testify against your sister, you're no longer part of this family." I'd known this was coming, had expected it even. But it still hurt, a sharp, clean pain like pulling out a splinter that had been festering for years. "Then I guess I'm not part of this family," I said. They left without another word. I cried for 20 minutes after they were gone, not because I'd lost them years ago, or maybe never had them at all, but because it was final now, official. Then I dried my tears, made myself coffee, and went back to work. The trial was everything I'd hoped for. My attorney was brilliant. She walked the jury through every piece of evidence with devastating clarity. The security footage of Melissa photographing my work. The forensic analysis showing my authentication code embedded throughout NextThread's platform. The timeline proving I'd filed patents 2 years before Melissa. The testimony from the freelancers Melissa had stolen from. The unpaid invoices. The string of failed businesses built on other people's work. Melissa's defense was that she'd collaborated with me, that I'd been involved in NextThread's development and was now trying to claim sole credit out of jealousy. But we had her own emails and text messages where she'd bragged to friends about finally finding her billion-dollar idea, messages where she'd explicitly told her developers to make sure there's no trace back to Emily's original work. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found in my favor on every count: patent infringement, theft of trade secrets, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. The judge awarded me full ownership of NextThread's patents and technology, $3 million in damages, every penny Melissa had raised from investors. Another $5 million in punitive damages. But more importantly, the judge issued an injunction preventing Melissa from operating any business involving technology, intellectual property, or raising investment capital for 10 years. Melissa's face when the verdict was read was a mask of shock and disbelief. She genuinely thought she would win, had believed until the very end that her charm and manipulation would carry her through. As the bailiff led her away to deal with the fraud charges that the district attorney had filed during the trial, she looked back at me once. "I hate you," she mouthed. I smiled and mouthed back, "I know." After the trial, I spent 3 months building my real company. I called it Thread True, and I launched it with the backing of real investors who'd seen the trial coverage and recognized genuine innovation. The platform I'd built, the real one, not the broken version Melissa had stolen, was everything I'd promised and more. The AI actually worked. The sustainability metrics were revolutionary. The partnerships were solid. Within 6 months, we'd signed deals with major retailers. Within a year, we'd processed our millionth transaction. Within 18 months, ThreadTrue was valued at $50 million. The tech press that had loved Melissa's story now loved mine even more. The wronged sister who'd risen from theft and betrayal to build a genuine success. I gave interviews about innovation and integrity, about the importance of protecting intellectual property and standing up to bullies, even when they're family. I hired the freelancers Melissa had stolen from, paying them fairly and giving them credit for their work. I established a fund to help other victims of IP theft pursue legal action. And I lived well. I bought a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I hired a chef and a personal trainer. I traveled to Paris and Tokyo and Sydney, attending fashion conferences and building partnerships. I actually dated, not just the desperate hookups of my previous life. I had friends, real friends, people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. I was happy. And Melissa? The fraud conviction earned Melissa 18 months in federal prison. She served 14 months, got out early for good behavior, which almost made me laugh. Melissa had always been good at convincing authority figures she was reformed, repentant, deserving of another chance. But this time, there was no bouncing back. The business injunction meant she couldn't start another company or raise capital. Her reputation was toxic. A simple Google search brought up hundreds of articles about the theft and fraud. Even the marketing agency that had employed her before NextThread refused to take her back. My parents paid for an apartment for her, a small place in a suburb 40 minutes from the city. They sent her money monthly, not much, but enough to survive. She got a job as the administrative assistant at a dentist's office. She drove a 10-year-old Honda. She lived quietly, keeping her head down, trying to disappear. I knew all of this because I kept tabs on her. Not out of vindictiveness, I wasn't that person anymore, but out of pragmatism. I needed to make sure she wasn't planning another scheme, wasn't looking for a way to hurt me again. But Melissa was broken in a way that went beyond prison or poverty. The trial had stripped away the delusion that had sustained her entire life. The belief that she was special, that rules didn't apply to her, that she could take whatever she wanted without consequences. Now she knew differently. I saw her once, about 3 years after the trial. I was in her suburb for a meeting with a sustainable textile manufacturer, and I stopped for coffee at a local cafe. She was there, sitting alone in the corner, staring at a laptop that looked like it had been refurbished multiple times. For a moment, we just looked at each other. She'd aged, her expensive highlights had grown out, her designer clothes replaced with discount store basics. But more than that, something in her face had changed. The arrogance was gone. The calculating glint in her eyes was gone. She looked tired, defeated, small. I could have approached her, could have said something cutting or triumphant, could have offered false forgiveness or genuine cruelty. Instead, I turned and walked out. I didn't need closure from Melissa, didn't need her apology or her acknowledgement. The trial had given me everything I required: justice, vindication, and the freedom to build a life that was truly mine. Melissa was no longer my concern, no longer my problem, no longer even my enemy. She was simply irrelevant. 5 years after my rebirth, I threw a party. It was ThreadTrue's 5th anniversary, and we were celebrating a valuation of $200 million and expansion into 18 countries. The party was at a rooftop venue overlooking downtown with champagne and catering and a string quartet. I'd invited everyone who'd been part of the journey: my team, our investors, the freelancers who'd become department heads, the partners who'd believed in the vision. I hadn't invited my family. My parents had reached out twice after the trial, once to ask for money when their business hit a rough patch, and once to invite me to Melissa's welcome home party after her release from prison. I'd declined both. But as I stood on that rooftop watching the sun set over the city, drinking champagne that cost more than my old month's rent, I thought about them. In my first life, I'd died with nothing. Alone and poor and forgotten, convinced I was a failure, believing on some level that Melissa had deserved to succeed where I hadn't. In this life, I'd built everything I'd dreamed of and more. The difference wasn't talent or luck or even the advantage of foreknowledge. The difference was that this time I'd protected myself. I'd been strategic. I'd refused to be a victim. I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation or aggression. Sometimes the best revenge is letting your enemies destroy themselves while you build something beautiful from the ashes of what they tried to steal. My phone buzzed. A text from my attorney. The civil judgment just hit Melissa's account. Full $8 plus interest. Congratulations. Melissa had finally sold off the last of her assets, a small rental property she'd bought before everything collapsed. The court had ordered the proceeds to go toward paying off the civil judgment from the trial. She would be paying me, in installments, for the rest of her life. I deleted the text without responding. I didn't need the money anymore. ThreadTrue was profitable beyond my wildest dreams. But I didn't tell my attorney to stop the collections either. Melissa had stolen years of my life, both lives. She'd stolen my work, my opportunities, my future. She'd destroyed me without hesitation or remorse, and would have done it again if given the chance. So let her pay. Let her remember every month when that payment came due what happens when you build your success on someone else's foundation. Let her remember that some people are strong enough to rise from the ashes, and some people are the ashes. On the night of ThreadTrue's 7th anniversary, I received an unexpected email. It was from Melissa, the first communication I'd had from her in 4 years. Emily, I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm not writing to make excuses or to explain. There are no excuses for what I did. I'm writing because I wanted you to know that I understand now what I took from you, what I destroyed, what I was. I've spent the last 7 years trying to understand how I became the person who could steal from her own sister. Who could justify it? Who could sleep at night knowing what I'd done? I think I was afraid. Afraid that I wasn't as special as everyone told me I was. Afraid that without shortcuts and stolen advantages, I would fail. And when I saw your work, saw how brilliant it was, how much more talented you were than I'd ever be, I couldn't handle it. So I took it, told myself I deserved it more, that you'd never do anything with it anyway. I was wrong about everything. You would have succeeded with or without my interference. And I would have failed with or without your work because I never had the substance to sustain success. I was always hollow, always taking, never creating. I know you're happy now. I follow ThreadTrue's news. I see the articles about you, the awards, the interviews. I'm glad you got everything you deserved. I'm also glad I got what I deserved. Not the prison time or the poverty, though I earned those, but the clarity, the understanding of who I really was. Sometimes you need to lose everything to see anything. Don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know that you were right about all of it. I hope you're happy, M. I really do. M. I read the email 3 times. Part of me, the part that was still 25 and broken and dying in the street, wanted to write back something cutting. Something that would hurt her the way she'd hurt me. But the larger part of me, the part that had built ThreadTrue and made genuine friends and learned to be happy, felt only exhaustion. Melissa was right. She had gotten what she deserved, and so had I. But I had no interest in maintaining any kind of relationship, even one mediated by occasional apologetic emails, with the person who'd tried to destroy me. I moved the email to a folder labeled Archive without responding. Maybe that made me cold. Maybe it made me unforgiving. But I'd learned something in my 2 lives. Forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation. And I didn't owe Melissa anything. I'd given her enough. 10 years after my rebirth, ThreadTrue went public. The IPO valued us at $1.2 billion. I retained 40% of the company, making me, at 35 years old, worth nearly $500 million. The media loved the story. Forbes ran a cover feature, "The Sister Who Came Back: How Emily Chen Built a Fashion Empire from Stolen Dreams." I did the interviews, told the story, parts of it anyway. The theft, the lawsuit, the vindication. I didn't mention the rebirth, the foreknowledge, the supernatural second chance. Some things are too strange to explain. Instead, I talked about resilience, about the importance of documentation and legal protection, about standing up to bullies even when they're family, about building something real rather than stealing something hollow. Young entrepreneurs reached out to thank me. Other victims of IP theft contacted me for advice. I became a spokesperson for intellectual property protection, for women in tech, for sustainable business practices. I established the Chen Foundation, funding legal assistance for inventors and creators fighting theft. I endowed scholarships for first-generation college students studying computer science. I bought the building where I'd lived in poverty during my first life and converted it into affordable housing for struggling entrepreneurs. I bought my parents' medical supply company when it finally failed. They'd mismanaged it for years after losing focus during Melissa's trial. I didn't do it out of forgiveness. I did it to save the jobs of the 200 employees who would have lost everything in bankruptcy. Then I fired my parents from their positions and installed professional management. They sent me a letter afterward. It was mostly what I expected: accusations of disloyalty, complaints about my cruelty, a list of everything they'd done for me, which was notably short. But at the end, my mother had written something that stuck with me. "You've become hard, Emily. Successful, yes, but hard. I don't know if that's what you wanted." I thought about that for a long time. Was I hard? Probably. The soft Emily of my first life, the one who'd trusted her sister, who'd believed in fairness, who'd died broken and alone, was gone. But hard wasn't the same as cruel. Hard wasn't the same as unfair. I was hard because the world had demanded it, because softness had gotten me killed, because sometimes survival requires a titanium spine and a willingness to watch your enemies fall. I didn't apologize for it. 15 years after my rebirth, I got married. Her name was Sarah, and she was the environmental engineer I'd met through ThreadTrue's sustainability initiatives. She was brilliant and funny and kind, and she knew my whole story, including the parts that sounded impossible. "So you died and came back?" she'd asked on our third date after I'd had enough wine to think telling the truth was a good idea. "Yes." "And you spent 2 years setting up an elaborate trap for your sister?" "Yes." "That's incredibly petty." She'd grinned. "I love it." We got married on a beach in Thailand, surrounded by friends and colleagues and the family we'd chosen. No blood relatives attended. I was 40 years old, wealthy beyond measure, happily married, and running a company that had genuinely made the world better. ThreadTrue's sustainable fashion platform had prevented millions of tons of textile waste. We'd revolutionized supply chains across the industry. We'd proven that environmental responsibility and profitability could coexist. I'd achieved everything I'd ever dreamed of in my first life, and then some. But sometimes, late at night, I still thought about the moment the truck hit me, the moment everything ended. And I wondered, why? Why had I been given a second chance when millions of others hadn't? What made my death reversible when so many deaths were permanent? I never found an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe it was random chance, a cosmic accident, a glitch in whatever system governed life and death. Or maybe, and this was the thought that kept me up at night, maybe I'd been sent back for a reason, to correct something, to balance scales that had been tipped too far in the wrong direction. If that was true, then maybe I wasn't done yet. 20 years after my rebirth, I received another email. This one was from a hospital in Portland. Melissa had been admitted 3 days earlier after collapsing at work. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, metastasized, terminal. The email, sent by a social worker, informed me that Melissa had no health insurance, no savings, and no one else to contact. My parents had died in a car accident 6 years earlier, leaving nothing but debts. I was the only family she had left. The social worker asked if I would be willing to cover Melissa's medical expenses or, at minimum, make arrangements for her care. I stared at the email for a long time. This was it, the final choice, the last chance, to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. I could ignore it, let Melissa die alone in a charity ward, struggling with medical debt she could never pay. It would be no more than she deserved. Or I could help, show mercy she'd never shown me, be the bigger person. I closed my laptop and walked to my window. My penthouse overlooked Central Park, and from this height, The city looked small, manageable, like something I could hold in my hand and protect. Sarah found me there an hour later. "You okay?" And she asked, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "Melissa is dying." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." "Do you want to help her?" I turned to face my wife. "Is that what a good person would do?" "I don't know if there's a good person answer here," Sarah said carefully. "Melissa tried to destroy you. She stole your work, gaslit you, built her entire success on your suffering. You don't owe her anything." But mercy isn't about what someone deserves. It's about who you want to be." I thought about that. In my first life, I died bitter and broken, convinced the world was unfair and people like Melissa always won. In this life, I'd proven that wasn't true. I'd shown that justice was possible, that hard work and integrity could triumph over theft and manipulation. I'd won, completely, utterly, in every way that mattered. So, what would one more victory look like? I paid for Melissa's treatment, not the bare minimum, full coverage at one of the best cancer centers in the country, private room, experimental treatments, every possible chance at survival. I didn't visit her, didn't send cards or flowers, just made sure the bills were paid and she had everything she needed. She lived for 11 months after the diagnosis, 7 months longer than the doctors had predicted. The treatment didn't cure her, but it gave her time. Time to settle her affairs. Time to make peace with her life. Time to write me one final letter. It arrived 3 days after she died. "Emily, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I wanted to thank you for the medical care, but I know you didn't do it for my gratitude. You probably didn't do it for me at all. You did it because you're a better person than I ever was. I've spent these last months thinking about my life, about all the choices I made, all the people I hurt. I kept a list. It's enclosed with this letter. Everyone I stole from, everyone I manipulated, everyone I destroyed for my own advantage. It's a long list. I wanted you to know that I used the time you gave me to make what amends I could. I wrote letters to everyone on the list, apologized, explained. In some cases, I was even able to make small restitutions. Most people didn't respond. I don't blame them, but I also wanted you to know something else. Something I couldn't bring myself to tell you while I was alive because I was still too proud, still too scared. I'm glad you won. Not just the lawsuit or the company. I'm glad you won at life. I'm glad you became successful and happy and everything I pretended to be but never was. Because you deserved it, and I didn't. In some other universe, maybe I'm a better person. Maybe I'm the sister who celebrated your success instead of stealing it, who protected you instead of betraying you, who loved you the way sisters should. But in this universe, I was the villain in your story, and you were the hero in mine. You just didn't know it. Thank you for giving me these last months. Thank you for being merciful when you had every right to be cruel. Thank you for showing me that people can choose to be better than their worst impulses. I hope you stay happy, Em. I hope you build a beautiful life and never look back. You were always the better sister, the better person, the better everything. I'm sorry I spent so long refusing to see it. Your sister, Melissa." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I filed it away in the same drawer where I kept the patent award, the IPO announcement, and a photo of me and Sarah on our wedding day. Artifacts of a life built from ashes. 25 years after my rebirth, 47 years into my second life, I stood in front of a crowd of 5,000 people at a tech women conference. I was 50 years old. ThreadTrue was now operating in 63 countries. My net worth had crossed $2 billion. The Chen Foundation had helped 300 creators fight IP theft with a 92% success rate. But that wasn't why I was there. I was there to give a keynote speech about resilience, about second chances, about the difference between justice and revenge. I was 27 when I died, I told the crowd, and a surprised murmur went through the audience. Obviously, I got better. Laughter. I'm not speaking metaphorically. I died, hit by a truck while running from a meeting where my sister had stolen my life's work. And then I woke up 2 years earlier with a chance to live those years again. The audience had gone silent. This wasn't what they'd expected from a tech entrepreneur's keynote. I could have used that second chance to protect my work, to hide it away, prevent the theft, build my company quietly and safely. But I chose a different path. I chose to let my sister steal from me again, because I knew that if I simply avoided her, she would find another victim, another person to hurt, another life to destroy. I paused, looking out at the crowd. Hundreds of faces, mostly young women, all watching me intently. So I built a trap. I let her commit the crime. I documented everything. And when she'd built her entire identity around my stolen work, I destroyed her. Another murmur. This one was harder to read. Shock, approval, judgment. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something about power and justice. We live in a world that tells us to be kind, to forgive, to turn the other cheek. And there's value in that. Genuine value. I thought of Melissa's final letter, the medical bills I'd paid, the mercy I'd shown when I didn't have to. But kindness without boundaries is doormat. Forgiveness without accountability is enablement. Sometimes the most ethical thing you can do is ensure your abuser faces consequences. I saw heads nodding throughout the audience. Document your work, protect your intellectual property, don't trust people just because they're family. And if someone steals from you, if someone tries to build their success on your suffering, don't let it go. Fight back with everything you have. I smiled. And if you happen to get a supernatural second chance at life, use it wisely. The audience erupted in applause. After the speech, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25. She had tears in her eyes. My business partner stole my code, she said, my investor pitch. Everything. And everyone keeps telling me to just move on, that pursuing legal action will make me look petty or difficult. But after hearing your story, take him down, I said firmly. Document everything. Hire a good attorney. And don't stop until justice is served. You don't owe anyone your silence about theft. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you. I watched her walk away, shoulders a little straighter, purpose in her step, and I thought, this is why I came back. Not just to save myself, but to show others that it's possible, that you can survive betrayal, that you can turn pain into power, that you can build something beautiful from the ruins of what someone tried to steal. I'm 65 now, 40 years past my rebirth, longer in this second life than I ever lived in the first. Thread True has been passed to new leadership, brilliant people who share the vision and will take it forward. I'm still involved as board chair, but I've stepped back from day-to-day operations. Sarah and I split our time between New York, Tokyo, and a small villa in southern France. We garden and travel and support causes we believe in. We're happy. I think about Melissa sometimes, about the sister she could have been, the relationship we could have had, but I don't regret my choices. Don't second-guess the trap I set or the ruin I caused. Because here's the truth I've learned across 2 lifetimes. You cannot show mercy to someone who's actively trying to destroy you and expect to survive. You cannot forgive someone who shows no remorse and expect to stay whole. First, you protect yourself. You fight back. You ensure justice is served and your abuser cannot hurt others. Then maybe you can afford mercy. In my case, I gave Melissa mercy when she was dying, when she could no longer hurt me or anyone else, when the power dynamic was finally irrevocably balanced. Was it enough mercy? Too much? The right kind? I don't know. I'm still not sure there are right answers to questions like that, but I know I gave what I could afford to give. No more, no less. And I know that I built a life worth living, a life of purpose and achievement and genuine happiness. 2 lives, really. The broken one I lost and the beautiful one I built from its ashes. I don't know why I was chosen for a second chance. Don't know if there was a cosmic reason or just random luck, but I know what I did with that chance. I fought back, I won, I helped others win too, and in the end, justice wasn't just served, it was catered.